Have you ever wondered why cars in the US use different oils from cars in Europe and other countries? No, it's not about fuel economy, engine performance, or emissions. In this video, I reveal the real reason why US cars use 0W-20, but the same engines use 5W-30 abroad. I'll also show how using the wrong one will cost you thousands. At the end, I'll reveal a mechanic's secret dealers don't want you to know. Let's dive in. Section 1. The real meaning of oil viscosity numbers. Before we get into which oil is right for you, let me briefly explain what the number means. The number before the W refers to how well oil lubricates in winter. The number after the dash measures the oil viscosity when the engine is warm. These numbers are determined via two tests. The first is called dynamic viscosity, and this measures the winter performance. The lower the first number on your bottle is, the colder the weather it can endure. 0W oil can protect your engine in temperatures as low as -31 degrees Fahrenheit. 5W oil comes close at -22 degrees Fahrenheit. 10W oil taps out at -13 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, let's move on to the second number. Kinematic viscosity is used to measure normal operating temperature viscosity, which is at 212 degrees Fahrenheit. 0W-20 oil has a maximum kinematic viscosity of 9.3 centistokes, while 5W-30 is 12.5 centistokes. Higher centistokes means the oil maintains a thicker protective film at high temperatures. The third number you need to know is the high temperature, high shear viscosity. This measures how the oil acts when it reaches the hottest parts of the engine, such as the bearings, camshaft, piston rings, and liner. HTHS measures viscosity at 302 degrees Fahrenheit. We'll get into HTHS a little later. But first, let's get back into the real world. Section 2. Do manufacturers really recommend different oils? Back in the 1990s, Honda published a study in the SAE journal on the impact of 0W-20 oil on fuel efficiency. The Japanese car maker concluded that 0W-20 was better for cars because it reduces fuel consumption. But since 2010, Honda has recommended 5W-30 and even thicker oils for its vehicles sold in South America, Europe, Australia, Africa, and the Middle East. Toyota and Nissan quickly followed suit. Now, practically every car brand that sells globally does the same thing. For example, the Mazda 6 recommends 0W-20 in the US, but 5W-30 for Mexico and the rest of the world. The Nissan Versa even goes up to 20W-50 for cars in the Caribbean. Same engine, same specs. Toyota has also begun recommending 0W-16 for some of its vehicles in the US, such as the 2017 Camry 4-cylinder and hybrid models, the Corolla, and the RAV4. Yet in Australia, the manual allows up to 10W-30. If thick oils are bad, why would manufacturers recommend them? Obviously, this means that their oil recommendations aren't based on engine performance. While some people have argued that it's due to what oils are available in different countries, that doesn't add up. After all, if an oil is bad for an engine, it won't become good because that's all I have. No, the real reason is something more sinister. And sadly, it's a truth manufacturers have been hiding from you. Section 3. The real reason why manuals recommend 0W-20 in the US. Oil recommendations in the US are not about mechanics, engine performance, or anything scientific. It's about money. They're money, even if it costs you thousands later on. This is all thanks to the EPA and the Corporate Average Fuel Economy, or CAFE standards. Every manufacturer must ensure that their combined fuel economy for all cars sold in the United States meets a certain standard. If any company fails to meet that target, it will incur pretty hefty fines. In 2024, NHTSA set penalties at $17 per vehicle for each tenth of a mile per gallon that a manufacturer's average fuel economy fell below the applicable standard. Despite their best efforts, car makers often fall short. Between 2011 and 2020, the cumulative fine for all car makers in the US was $1.1 billion. While this policy has forced manufacturers to be more fuel efficient, it has also made them bend the rules a little. True to Honda's research, 0W-20 improves fuel economy. Thinner oils reduce internal engine friction. Less friction means less energy lost, which translates directly into better fuel economy. By switching to 0W-20 or even 0W-16, you can save 2.4% on average on fuel. So, by forcing everyone to adopt thinner oils, car makers have been able to save millions and potentially billions of dollars. Before we get into how corporate greed might be killing your engine, let's look at how it helps. Section 4, how 0W-20 improves fuel economy and reduces emissions. Think of all the moving parts inside an engine. The crankshaft spinning, pistons moving up and down, camshafts rotating, valves opening and closing. All of these parts need oil to move more quickly without metal-on-metal contact. While a thicker oil, like 5W-30 or 10W-40, will provide a thicker protective film, it also adds more resistance. Think of how much easier it is to stir a cup of tea than it is to stir a milkshake. With 0W-20, there's less viscous drag. This means that the engine components don't have to work as hard to move through the oil, especially during startup. This reduction in parasitic drag also means that you don't need as much fuel to propel the car forward. And by cutting down on fuel consumption, you're also releasing fewer emissions. That brings us back to why the EPA and CAFE regulations are there in the first place. However, some argue that the fuel savings aren't worth the long-term costs. Do the math for yourself. The average fuel savings between 0W-20 and 5W-30 is 2.4% or 0.8 miles per gallon gains. However, this drops significantly when the ambient temperature reaches 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The fuel savings are also higher in new cars. Old cars see a 1.8% bump, while a Toyota Camry Hybrid will get a 2.9% improvement. Cost savings on the highway are also better at 2.8% compared to 1.9% in the city. Depending on how you drive, you might save almost $100 a year. If this isn't enough reason to convince you to keep using 0W-20, the next one might be Section 5, how new engines maximize 0W-20. The main advantage of 0W-20 is in cold weather. One cold start in 23 degrees is equivalent to driving for 62 miles. While the damage to your engine is inevitable, there are ways to rescue it, and we discussed them in this video. Never start your car like this ever. But save that for later. Right now, it's time to explain how thin oil saves the day. Because 0W-20 oil circulates faster than 5W-30 in cold weather, the oil quickly forms a protective film on the metallic surfaces to prevent further damage. Every new engine has been designed to maximize this protective quality of thin oils. Modern engines designed for 0W-20 have tighter machining tolerances. These small gaps allow oil to circulate faster while maintaining adequate oil pressure. New anti-friction coatings have also reduced the need for thicker oils. Diamond-like carbon or graphite composites on low-friction piston skirts and other components reduce friction and improve lubrication. New oil pump designs and hydraulic systems also work well with lower viscosity oil without compromising flow and pressure. So, when you look at all of these things together, it's clear that cars are now being manufactured around thinner oils. However, this still begs the question, why isn't 0W-20 being used universally? That's because 0W-20 has a dark side that car makers don't want you to know about. Section 6. What's wrong with 0W-20? If you remember the first point in this video, You would already know the main problem with 0W-20, and it has to do with heat protection. A full synthetic 0W-20 is designed to handle extreme temperatures of between -40 degrees Fahrenheit to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Most cars in most climates tend to operate within these parameters. However, if you have a gasoline direct injection engine or a turbocharger, then your car has a hidden inferno. I'm referring to the area between the piston rings and the cylinder walls. As combustion gases superheat the oil, localized temperatures can reach as high as 482 degrees Fahrenheit. That is way beyond the capability of any full synthetic 0W-20. Later in the video, I'll explain why I'm emphasizing full synthetic and not conventional oil. At those high temperatures, the protective film from 0W-20 starts to break down. As the oil begins to evaporate, there will be more metal-on-metal contact. This will cause significant engine wear, leading to repairs in the thousands of dollars. In other situations, the oil coaks onto the hot piston surfaces, which then hinders ring movement and reduces efficiency. You'll get a lot of piston scuffing, which can cause overheating, increased vibrations, and loss of engine power. This is where 5W-30 comes in handy. At temperatures above 250 degrees Fahrenheit, 5W-30 maintains 50% greater film thickness than 0W-20. Does this mean that non-turbochargers and non-GDI engines are safe? Not quite. Section 7. Driving conditions that limit 0W-20. Choosing the right oil for your car is not just about the number stamped on the oil filler cap. If you look in your manual, you will see exemptions to the rule. The first one is, if you drive in high temperatures, desert climates, or regions with hot summers. In the Middle East, for example, the default oil is 10W-40. That's because the internal car temperature gets to as high as 158 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's just from parking under the sun. Under the hood, you're looking at close to 392 degrees Fahrenheit in normal driving conditions. Speaking of which, you also shouldn't use 0W-20 when you frequently tow, haul heavy loads, or climb mountains. These driving conditions drastically increase engine temperatures and mechanical stress, which causes oil to become thinner. This process breaks down oil and can cause permanent loss of viscosity. That is why you need to change your oil every 5,000 miles. But we'll get to that later. You also need thicker oil if you do a lot of aggressive driving. If you're constantly in the 3,000 RPM club, the additives in 0W-20 won't be able to handle the heat. And finally, you have to switch to a thicker viscosity oil once your car reaches 100,000 miles. As engines get older, the internal clearances naturally increase. That is why most manuals recommend switching to 5W-30 or thicker at this point. It is also convenient to note that this is when all warranties would have expired. So, does that mean that thicker oils have been better all along? Some other regions certainly think so. Section 8. Why European and Asian cars have different rules. You would think that the eco-friendly Europeans would be more aggressive about fuel reduction than the Americans. So, why don't they recommend 0W-20? While it is true that Europe and many Asian countries are particular about fuel consumption and the environment, they solve the problem differently. To begin with, cars outside of America are much smaller. Nearly 40% of cars sold in Europe are mini or subcompact cars, compared to just 10% in the US. As a result, fuel expenses are much lower. The average driver in the US spends between $1,992 to $2,449 on fuel per year. In the United Kingdom, that number is $1,437. But in Australia, it's even less at $950. So, by switching to smaller cars, other regions slash fuel costs by up to 50%. The other reason why cars in Europe and Asia don't recommend or necessitate 0W-20 is that they value longevity over minor gains. In countries like Germany, for example, where there is a lot of high-speed driving on the Autobahn, thicker oils are better. Another reason is that cars in Europe have seasonal viscosity recommendations. In winter, they'd suggest using 5W-30, then switch to 5W-40 in hot weather. However, we're seeing more cars suggesting the wider range of either 0W-40 or 5W-40 to use year-round. Before you decide to switch to thicker or thinner oils, there is one more number you need to consider. Section 9. High temperature, high shear viscosity. Roughly 60% of drivers unknowingly use the wrong oil. However, that statistic only refers to the SAE viscosity numbers on the bottle. What that statistic ignores, and what most drivers don't even know about, is HTHS. HTHS measures the viscosity of an engine lubricant at 302 degrees Fahrenheit. This test was developed by oil manufacturers, and it analyzes how oil acts around the bearings, camshaft, the piston rings, and the liner. Oil manufacturers want to know how thin an oil can get while still lubricating the engine and reducing fuel consumption. HTHS is measured in centipoise. 20-grade oil has an HTHS of about 2.6 centipoise, 30-grade is 2.9, and 40-grade is 3.5. This is where it gets interesting. Some cars might recommend 0W-20, but also include a high HTHS of about 2.8. However, most cars won't even list the HTHS, so you'll only find what you need when you perform a used oil analysis test. I had a client come in, and his manual recommended 0W-20, but gave permission to use 5W-20 and 5W-30. However, his UOA came back saying he needed an HTHS of 3.3. So he switched to 5W-30 and his engine ran smoothly. Sure, fuel economy dropped marginally, but he saw lower metal levels, which means he won't need a new engine anytime soon. Here's another twist. The same oil viscosity can have different HTHS depending on the producer. So, if your car requires a specific HTHS, look up that number on the bottle or on their website. Now, if you're considering switching to thicker oil, you need to know if the law is on your side or not. Section 10. Oil viscosity and warranty. The biggest fear for people who are afraid of changing their oil viscosity is losing their warranty. This is particularly important if you drive a problem-prone car like any of the vehicles on this list. 17 worst cars that no one buys according to Consumer Reports. If you listen to your dealership, you'll believe that changing oil viscosity will terminate your warranty. However, what happens when your manual says you can use thicker oil if 0W-20 isn't available? That should let you know that switching oils won't automatically void your warranty. According to the Magnuson-Moss Warranty Act, a manufacturer cannot void your warranty for using a different oil or aftermarket part unless they can prove that the part caused the failure. So, let's begin with the obvious one. If you switch to 5W-30 and you have an unrelated malfunction, your warranty still stands, because the oil had nothing to do with it. What about an engine failure that is oil-related? If the oil isn't 0W-20, but your manual says you can use it, your warranty still stands. What is more likely to void your warranty is if you don't change oil as often as required. When you do change oil, make sure you always keep receipts and a proper record. Now that you know what the law says, here is my recommendation. Section 11. What mechanics do, but don't tell you. If you want your car to last up to 500,000 miles, here is how mechanics go about choosing the right oil. Step 1. Perform a UOA test. If you plan on driving your car for hundreds of thousands of miles, this test is a must. It costs about $100, but it's money well spent. It will reveal whether the oil you're using is good or bad for your engine. It will also identify any fuel dilution, coolant leaks, or the presence of wear metals. By identifying any potential problems, the test will also let you know how often you need to change oil. My shop rule is 5,000 miles with full synthetic. However, depending on your car and your driving habits, this could come down to 3,000 miles or go up to 7,500 miles. If you don't want to spend money on a test, you can skip to the next one. Step 2. Match the oil to the ambient temperature. Using 0W-20 in winter is a no-brainer. However, if you plan on doing some towing or hard driving, you can opt for 0W-40 if your manual accepts it. During summer, hike it up to 5W-30. This will handle towing, turbochargers, and city driving in any weather across the US. Step 3. Match the oil to your mileage. For new cars in the break-in period, only use the oil recommended. If your manual says you should use 0W-20 throughout, even during summer, then that's what you should do. The assertion that you need thick oil for the break-in period is a myth, and it will compromise your car's performance forever. You will always struggle with oil leaks, oil burning, or poor performance. The only time when you must review oil viscosity is when your car reaches 75,000 miles. You might need to switch to high mileage oil or begin using 5W-30 or thicker. However, if your engine isn't leaking and performance is still great, don't change a thing. That brings us to the end of this video. While the US and other countries might disagree on oil, they all agree on full synthetic. However, not all synthetics are good for your car. Make sure what you're using isn't on the naughty list in this next video. 9 best synthetic oils and 5 worst that ruin your engine.